This is Oleg Hordichuk from the city of Hostomel in Ukraine. In March 2022, he was shot into both his legs by the Russian soldiers on the backyard of his house, then blindfolded along with his wife and 23-year-old son, taken to Belarus and then Russia, where his son has been illegally detained ever since. Could that be that he was just a civilian in the wrong place at the wrong time? And this is the drama theater in Mariupol where hundreds of women and children were hiding. It was hit by a direct Russian airstrike. And this is Bucha, near Ukrainian capital, which has become a synonym of Russian massacres of civilians. And these are mass graves left by Russian soldiers in recently deoccupied Izyum in Kharkiv region. Thousands of civilians were killed and injured by Russian army. But maybe they were also just civilians in the wrong place at the wrong time? And these are millions of Ukrainians that had to leave their homes or even flee the country. Could it be that they were just civilians in the wrong place at the wrong time? And how about those civilians that have been suffering from war crimes in Moldova, Georgia, Chechnya, Mali, Lybia, Syria, all within the last 30 years? Could that be that they were just civilians in the wrong place at the wrong time? And what about those who might starve this year in developing countries because of food shortage caused by Russia blocking ships in Ukrainian ports during its aggression against Ukraine? Those who might freeze this winter because of Russian energy blackmail of Europe? Those who might not survive because of the defaults predicted in emerging markets all over the world, and inflation going through the roof caused by factors triggered by Russian invasion of Ukraine? Would all these people also be just civilians in the wrong place at the wrong time? No, they will all be victims of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Yes, you heard me right. All these millions of people all over the world can be equally considered the victims of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and here's why. Having documented over 21,000 crimes committed by the Russian army in Ukraine, the Kyiv-based Center for Civil Liberties and co-founder of the Tribunal for Putin initiative can tell you a lot about the sheer horror of Russian war crimes. The international law has codified war crimes and crimes against humanity, and all these crimes have been meticulously recorded. Direct attacks and damage of civilian objects, deaths and injuries caused by shelling, employing weapons causing superfluous injury, damage to buildings dedicated to religion, education, medical care, the enforced disappearances of persons, pillage of occupied towns, murders and willful killings of civilians, just a few out of 30 different types of crimes being documented every day. So monstrously frightening that you will find horror movies a playground comparing to this. Russia's actions in Chechnya, Moldova, Georgia, Mali, Lybia, Syria, and for the last 8 years in Ukraine show how far geographically as well as immorally Putin is prepared to journey. But as the terror and the trauma might be less visceral further away from a specific battlefield, the victims of this hybrid Russian war machine might not realize how widely they are scattered across the continents. It may be a special military operation liberating civilians from what the rest of the world calls normal lives. It may be economic unrest galvanized by energy blackmailing. It may be propaganda corroding democracies. Even the commodities such as food and fertilizers for next year's crops become weaponized. The tools might differ, but these tools are used by the same hybrid war machine, Putin's Russia. Because that's what imperialistic states do. They invade, terrorize, blackmail, corrupt other countries until they are forced to stop. And so far, Russia always got away with it. But Russia and its bloody dictator cannot and must not bully their way out of such egregious crimes. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 is not the first terrifying criminal military act of a dictator that has been going unpunished for decades. But it should and must become the last. And the reason why you should care about this war is not only because Russian aggression against Ukraine has become the most complicated challenge in Europe since World War II, but because it has revealed how one unjustified war of aggression can provoke an avalanche of economic, societal, and security unrest globally. How the principles of the rules-based international order, to which some 193 countries have subscribed to in the UN Charter, can be lying in pieces because one country has decided that it can neglect the principles of territorial integrity of other country, that human lives, human rights, international law, collective security mean nothing. But once it has become so clear, it is an obligation of the international community for the future generations to stop this hybrid war machine. If we ever are to build the world where force of law prevails over the law of force. And what is needed now is a politically direct momentum to start such a process, and consensus must emerge fast. Because if in the face of the enormous human suffering, threat of nuclear disaster, ecological disaster, witnessing non-provoked, unjustified, aggressive war where destructions and deaths caused by Russian aggression are so obvious and undeniable on 24-hour media, we're still not in agreement that the perpetrators need to be stopped and brought to justice, it would mean that money and economic interest value more than human lives, human values, freedom and justice, and that Russia's indigenous disinformation is succeeding, making the Russia's war in Ukraine the last war of Putin's sick imperialistic ambition is in the global interest. Russia must be stopped in Ukraine, and Russian war criminals must be brought to justice. And if you're still in doubt because the price that your country might need to pay for this might be too high, let me ask you one question. If Putin's methodical criminality is not stopped in Ukraine for good and not brought to justice, how do you know that Russia will not conduct a special operation on yours next?